As always, I'll go through what we've done, forms of business, basic equity, ethics, and management. Now from there, we went to source of law. Separation of powers. Separation of powers and source of law go together, kind of like basic business forms and the basic equation kind of go together. Then we're going to do judicial. This is chapter 14. This is chapter 14. We did chapter 15, which is partnerships. Neither one of these have chapters. This was chapter 2. This is chapter 4. This is chapter 1. This is chapter 2. After judicial, we will do contracts. After contracts, we will do torts. We will probably do those on the same day. Contracts is 11. Torts is 7. Torts and negligence. This class did pretty well on the practice midterm. The 101 classes had a torts question. I had gone over really basic torts and negligence with the 101 classes, and 50% of them didn't recognize it when they saw it. So remember, I'm looking for recognition. I'm looking for you to be able to tell what we're talking about. Source of law. Where did law come from? Common law is judge-made. A case comes in front of a judge, and the judge decides this is what the law is going to be. All right? Let's say that, let's try to make it simple. Let's say there's a dirt road in Newberry County that doesn't have a speed limit on it. And a sheriff's deputy stops you and charges you with speeding of 55 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone on that dirt road. So you go to court and you tell the judge there's no speed limit sign. There's no speed limit on that road. And the sheriff's deputy says, we have enforced 55 on that road for 50 years. All right. So what's the speed limit? The judge says, I'm going to say that from now on, the speed limit on that dirt road is 45 miles an hour. All right, so the judge just splits the difference, and he makes judge-made law. Now, that's a really simple example. Does anybody remember from a couple of weeks ago when I talked about where common law came from? Now, you don't have to remember this, but it was an English judge named Blackstone, okay, that in the 1500s wrote a book about that thick. I read it in law school. It's still good. It's still a good book. In England, all over Europe, every little village had a magistrate, had a court, had a judge. And if a cow went from one piece of property to the other piece of property, they would go in front of the judge and say, well, that's my cow. He's on my land. And the other person would say, no, that's my cow. He used to be on my land. And the judge would make a difference on whose cow, make a decision on whose cow it was. Judge Blackstone wrote it down. first judge ever who wrote down what he decided. He decided the answer. And then so every time it came up in any of these little towns in England, the judge would say the cow belongs to where it left, because that's what Judge Blackstone wrote. And the writing down of that is called precedent. Just to keep you educated, the Latin is called stare decisis. Until judges started writing stuff down, nobody knew what the law was. And every time they went to court, it'd be different. The second type of law. Statutory. Under separation of powers, we have the legislature or Congress. We have the executive branch, which is president or governor if it's in the states. And we have the judicial branch. Those are the three branches of government in America. Most countries all over the world follow that, except for France. France has got a really different setup. The legislature comes out and says, we want to make people pay taxes. And they write a bill that says all citizens have to pay taxes. That bill goes to the president, and he signs it. And it goes back to the legislature and becomes a law or a statute. A statute, the easiest way to remember a statute is it's on a piece of paper. Okay? Common law is in the judge's head. A statute, you can go to the law library in Columbia and you can go find the piece of paper that says what the law is. And you will find the piece of paper that says you got to pay taxes. Or you can look it up on your phone. But a statute means there is a law that exists, and that is statutory. And it comes from the legislature. Common law comes from the judiciary. What does that leave? It leaves the executive. Well, you got to pay taxes, but your congressman isn't going to come to your door and get your taxes. Who's going to come get your taxes? Who collects taxes? The IRS. Come on, put your thinking caps on. The IRS collects taxes. All right? The IRS is a regulatory and regulatory is run by the president. I call them the alphabet agencies. IRS, FBI, Securities and Exchange Commission, the American Disabilities Act, U.S. Department of Health. Anything that's got initials like that, and there may be 100 of them, are all run by the president. And they're called regulatory acts. Common law, never criminal. Statutory, criminal, or fine. Regulatory, criminal, or fine. So moving forward, I give you a test that says you work for a company that has been charged with polluting the air in Greenville, South Carolina. and the U.S. Department of Health and the American Pollution Act has come on site and charged you with polluting the air. Discuss these issues. So you're going to tell me, all right, this is a separation of powers issue. And the American Pollution Act is going to be regulatory, which is under the executive branch. And the person that came and gave you the warrant can fine you with a crime or a fine. The source of law would be regulatory. You just lay it out in simple sentences, just like we've already been doing. Okay? And look for the, you know, if I give you a test that has anything about taxes or anything about pollution or anything like that, it's regulatory. If I give you a test that has to do with criminal, then chances are it's going to be statutory. Any questions about separation of powers and source of law? All right. Pretty easy. Both chapters in the book are pretty easy to read. Chapter 2, I believe it's page 19, has everything you need to know about judicial. Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. Underneath SCOTUS is the Circuit Court of Appeals. Underneath that is the District Court. The District Court is the trial court. That's where you start out. That's where cases begin, in the District Court. District courts are in states, but they're not state courts. That's just where the courthouses are. If you lose, you go to the circuit court. There are 13 circuit courts. So if you get sued in federal court and you go to the district courthouse in Charleston or Myrtle Beach or Florence or somewhere like that, and you lose, you would appeal to the Circuit Court of Appeals. That's in Richmond, Virginia. We're in the same circuit as North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia. That's the 4th Circuit. Now, what determines whether it's a federal court or not? Big time word. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction. Yeah.
What was you were talking about it being over 75,000, is that?
That's what I'm getting. Yeah, that's what this is. Okay. Jurisdiction. Juris for judge. Diction is Latin for where you go to talk. Jurisdiction. Federal jurisdiction, national jurisdiction, is anywhere where there's 2 or more states involved. If the businesses are in 2 or more states, if one business is in Columbia and one business is in Dallas, Texas, then it's going to go to federal court every time. It has to. If it is 75,000 or more, you have the choice of going to federal court or state court. If it's $74,000, you have to go to state court. But if you're suing for more than $75,000, then you get federal jurisdiction. Third way is if it is a constitutional issue That is a really big deal, but I wouldn't test you on it. Okay, so now we've got South Carolina Supreme Court. We've got the Court of Appeals. And we've got what's called the Circuit Court. The Circuit Court is the trial court. So if you're going to sue somebody in Newberry County, you would go down to the courthouse and you would file the lawsuit in the Circuit Court. Now, the Circuit Court here has nothing to do with the Circuit Court over here. They just happen to use the same word. So the trial court starts in the Circuit Court. If you lose, you go to the Court of Appeals. If you lose there, you go to South Carolina Supreme Court. I have argued at both of those places and tried 1,000 cases in the Circuit Court. So what determines the jurisdiction in state court? What determines the jurisdiction in state court? Okay, tell me what federal court is again. 2 or more than 75,000, or sometimes a constitutional issue. State court is everything else. If you can't go to federal court, you go to state court. Most cases are in state court, by far. In South Carolina, the state courts are backed up 2 years. If I sued Ida for doing a bad video, we wouldn't be in court for 2 years. She'd be back in Sweden, freezing by then. Now, remember I told you that ethics and the basic equation, I could slip those into an exam really easy. All I had to do was say if somebody stole some money, or, this business wants to make a profit. I mean, I could very easily give you a hint that you've got to say something about ethics and something about the business equation. All right? The rest of them are a little harder. Okay? But the source of law, right here, which is combined with separation of powers, even though that's a lot of notes, for you to tell me that is a statutory issue that started in the legislative in Congress, that's one sentence in your answer and your grade goes way up. All right? So I may give you a test that really doesn't have anything to, I'm not going to say, tell me what the separation of powers are. I'm not going to say that. Okay? I'm going to give you a test where, that has to do with there is a law that says all manufacturers have to own property of less than 100 acres. And the corporation that you started bought property at 120 acres. And the government is trying to force you to sell 20 acres so you're within the law of having only 100 acres. Okay, now what kind of law would that be? It's going to be a statute. Okay, it's going to be a statute. Okay, there's no alphabet agency that comes and takes your land. Okay, and it's not common law. It's not going to be up to a judge to take your land, because I have already told you there is a law that says businesses can't own more than 100 acres. That's your hint. If there is a law, that is a hint. That is a statute. It's something you can put in your hand. It's a piece of paper. And so if you are telling me about the 5 decision makers and basic equation, if you're telling me about managing the business that's on the 120 acres, and I have slipped a sentence in there that says you aren't the law says you can't earn but 100 acres, then that's a hint. What does that mean? Well, it means there's also a statutory issue. This is also a statutory issue. The statutes come from the legislative and the Congress, and this business would need to fight the law that says they can't have 120 acres. Just recognize it. Don't tell me who wins and loses. Don't tell me they get to keep the 120, or don't tell me we've got to go buy somewhere else. Tell me there's a statute that says you can't have more than 100 acres, so this is a statutory issue, and we would need to fight to keep our 120 acres. One sentence answer, and you've covered all of that. My point is, the basic equation in ethics and the source of law and the separation of powers are usually simple answers. Okay? As long as you recognize it, you're not going to miss it. But you've got to look for it. Just like, if I say somebody stole money, there's some of these things across the top. There's so many things across the top that are going to be in every exam. That are going to be in every exam. Ethics, management, and probably separation of powers and source of law. Every time I give you a problem that has a law in it, you need to tell me where it came from. If I give you an exam that says you are working for a company and y'all have just been to court and the judge has ordered you to hire 10 people that you had previously fired because you discriminated against them, what kind of law is that? Common law. The judge has ordered you to do something. Okay, so there'll be a hint in there. You just have to recognize it. You have to check off your cheat sheet. You have to go to every one of the 10 or 11 things to see if there's something in that fact situation. But any questions? Anybody want me to lower their grade? Donovan, you going to keep your A, you're going to lower your grade. All right. Okay, we will have, we'll keep going on Monday. Next week is fall break, so we will not have a Friday test. And we will just keep going. Bring your book, please, so you can follow along with me.